You are watching BBC News, and let's stay with that major breaking news that an American Airlines flight and a military helicopter have crashed over Washington, D.C. These are the live pictures from the Potomac River. It is just gone 10 a.m. local time. The alert was raised at 8:48 last night. At least 28 bodies have been recovered, but local officials say they don't believe there are any survivors. Emergency responders have been working through the night in extremely cold conditions, and they say they've now switched from a rescue operation to a recovery operation. We understand that 27 bodies from the plane have been found and one from the helicopter, which the Pentagon says was on a training mission at the time of the collision. Well, those were the live pictures. Let me show you the pictures of the explosion itself in the sky, filmed by the EarthCam network at the Kennedy Center in Washington. Keep your eye on that red circle in the picture as the American Airlines plane comes into land. And there, the explosion. Here's another angle of the crash, which has been posted online, filmed from the dash cam of a vehicle approaching the airport.
Is it? It's blue.
Oh,
What happened?
oh my God!
We saw the flash with the two aircraft colliding before falling into the river. Well, our team of journalists have verified these images taken from a security camera at Ronald Reagan International Airport, which show another angle of the collision. So the pictures from overnight. We are expecting a live briefing from the Pentagon, but we've already had this posted by the US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth on X.
We are actively working to investigate and understand what occurred and why. At about 8:48 last night, a UH-60 assigned to the U.S. Army Aviation Brigade in the Military District of Washington, Fort Belvoir, Virginia, collided tragically with a civilian airliner. The unit involved, the Army unit involved, was Bravo Company 12th Aviation Battalion at Fort Belvoir. It was an annual proficiency training flight. And when we look at the crew, and not all kin have been notified, so we're going to withhold ranks and names at this point. We do know on our side who was involved. It was a fairly experienced crew, and that was doing a required annual night evaluation. They did have night vision goggles. The 12th Aviation Battalion, as of now, is granted a 48-hour operational pause on contingency missions as what happened is reviewed, and a senior level aviation team, an investigative team from our Aviation Safety Center, was deployed last night and already is in Washington, D.C. to investigate what's going on. We anticipate that the investigation will quickly be able to determine whether the aircraft was in the corridor and at the right altitude at the time of the incident. As I mentioned, next of kin notifications are ongoing. It's a tragedy, a horrible loss of life for those 64 souls on that civilian airliner, and of course, the 3 soldiers in that Black Hawk. They're in our prayers, their families and their communities. As people are notified, I can't imagine. And I know it's gone from a rescue mission to a recovery mission, and we're with all the first responders that are moving actively too. So at the Defense Department, our thoughts and prayers go out. We are actively investigating to find out what happened and why. And as we get updates, you will have them. God bless.
Well, as I say, that is the Defense Secretary. He posted that a little while ago on X. We are going to get a briefing from the Pentagon. I was seeing the pictures only a short while ago. We don't think that's that far away. We'll carry it live here as soon as it starts. Don't forget, in about 50 minutes' time, we're also told we will hear from the President. So Donald Trump is going to speak for the first time in front of the cameras about those events overnight. Well, let's head to our correspondent Carl Nasman, who's at the Reagan International Airport. And Carl, it has been a terrible, terrible night, and underlined by what the Defense Secretary was saying and what we heard from officials, that this has now turned from a rescue operation to one of recovery.
That's right, Matthew. That is obviously what everyone was here was racing for and worried about, that those recovery or those rescue operations would turn to recovery operations. It's exactly what's happened. We heard at that press conference about an hour or so earlier today that Indeed, they believe that everybody on board, not only the passenger plane, but that military helicopter, has passed away in this mid-air collision. What we saw really throughout the night here, Matthew, 9 p.m. local time, that was when that mid-air collision took place. Nearly immediately, so we saw this massive emergency response arriving on the scene, multiple different states involved, some 300 personnel participating in that rescue effort. We saw boats, we saw divers, we saw helicopters around the scene, and throughout the night, really battling some difficult conditions. Not only was it dark, but it was cold out there. There's still some ice in the Potomac River. You still see snow on the ground around Washington, D.C. So that cold making things difficult. The darkness also quite difficult. The water not very clear, kind of a shallow area of the river, about 5 to 7 feet, is where the fuselage of that airplane as well as a helicopter are believed to have kind of settled down after that collision. But rescuers are really working for many hours until we did get that news that they now believe that no one survived this crash. 27 bodies from the plane out of the 64 we know were on board have now been recovered. One body from that helicopter, and that helicopter had 3 crew on board. But of course, as that rescue or operation, the relief efforts, trying to recover those bodies, as that continues, already, Matthew, we're seeing this airport, Reagan National Airport, start to prepare for operations again. We've been seeing people coming in with their suitcases. These are folks who either had flights this morning or might have had their flights canceled or delayed overnight. They're coming in looking a bit on edge, we have to say. I was speaking with one woman who has a flight today to Fort Lauderdale in Florida. We spoke with her. She's a D.C. resident. She said she's used to seeing this kind of level of air traffic, not only the planes taking off and landing every few minutes here at DCA, at Reagan Airport, but also seeing the military presence, many presidential helicopters taking off and leaving, but she'd never seen anything quite like this. She said she was a bit nervous today. The words she told us were freaked out. So this is certainly something that's affecting the community here, but of course, given the victims now here, this is not only a national tragedy, but an international one as well.
Carl, you've been there for hours, and of course this collision happened in the moments as this passenger jet was landing, so you had a terminal full of families, of friends, of relatives, seeing both the collision potentially and certainly in the immediate aftermath. You were describing it, just the speed that we saw so many responders arrive there at the airport.
That's right, Matthew. That's one of the really difficult aspects of this is, that plane was a couple of minutes away from landing. It was making its final descent towards that runway when this incident took place. There were absolutely people here, of course, waiting to greet their family members, waiting to greet their loved ones or friends. And we actually heard a quick interview done with local media here of a husband waiting for his wife to land. He had sent a text message and he could tell by the phone that it was never received. So these are the kinds of stories we'll be hearing more and more about as we begin to learn more of the names and identities of the people that were on that plane. We know that there are family members here waiting, and presumably one of the reasons why we haven't seen a full list of identities or names is because authorities would want to speak with the family members first. We do know, Matthew, that there's some ties here. This was a plane that obviously came from Kansas, from a city named Wichita, here to D.C. And in Kansas, there was a national figure skating competition. And then after that, there was this sort of developmental or training program for young skaters. And we believe that there were many in the ice skating community actually on board this plane. We know that there was a large group of U.S. figure skaters. In fact, the U.S. Skating Association released a statement saying, quote, several members of the skating community were on board that plane. They mentioned athletes, they mentioned coaches and family members too. We also know that there were 2 Russian nationals, 2 Russian figure skaters, a married couple. They were actually world champions back in 1994. They were on that plane too. And now we're hearing some reports in local media that there might have been as many as 6 ice skaters from the city of Boston, not far away here on the East Coast. So this is looking like a tragedy that is affecting not only multiple different cities, multiple different countries, but also striking at the heart of the ice skating community here in the United States.
Carl, thanks very much. That's Carl Nasman there at the airport. We will be hearing and taking that news conference live from the Pentagon just as soon as it starts. But we are juggling two enormous stories here through the course of today across BBC News. The reaction from this plane collision in Washington. Also, we have seen through the early hours here a short while ago the release of the hostages, the latest release, the third round in terms of the releases. We saw 8 releases earlier today, 3 Israelis and 5 Thai nationals released. And now these are the live pictures of the second part of the exchange, the Palestinians who are being released. And there you see the coaches that are being put into place. So a lot of focus, of course, on the hours earlier with those 3 Israelis. We saw one by one the releases, and of course we've heard from the Israeli Prime Minister's office the fury at the chaotic conditions we saw with those hostage releases, particularly Abel Yehud and Gadi Moses, the 29-year-old and the 8-year-old, with the crowds that were buffeting them for a number of minutes as they were relieved. And that had delayed this part of the release, with the Israelis, as I say, furious at what had happened. And so they were delaying that until they had assurances, they said, from negotiators there'd be no repeat, because, of course, we have future exchanges still to be done. The next one is on Saturday. But the next stage, despite all of those delays, around 110 Palestinians being released today, including women and children. And we will see some of those scenes in Ramallah a little later when the buses arrive there, with families being reunited. So the first part of the second stage of these releases as part of that Hamas-Israel ceasefire and hostage deal that was agreed 10 days or so ago. So we'll keep an eye on those pictures and return and get more from our correspondents on the ground. Now, let's go back to those events in Washington. Let me put the live pictures from the Potomac River back onto the screen, because those recovery operations going on, and you see the icy conditions there overnight. The responders were talking about the ice there on the water. It is not very deep where the wreckage has ended up, both of the aircraft and the helicopter, but it is still very, very difficult conditions. That's what the officials in that earlier briefing we were listening to a couple of hours ago were taking us through. But 300 responders at least there on the scene. But as Carl was saying, as those officials were saying, this has now become a recovery operation. Now, also mentioned in that news conference earlier, a lot of questions about the how this happened, questions about the communications with the control tower and the passenger aircraft and the helicopter. Well, just a small passage of that has been released, and I just want to play that in the next few seconds. It is the audio from the airport flight controllers speaking to the military helicopter in the moments before the crash. Now, they refer to it as PAT-25, with the civilian airliner referred to as CRJ. Have a listen to this short exchange.
PAT-25, get CRJ in flight. PAT-25, pathfinder CRJ. Did you see that?
Well, there you see. Did you see that ending, that just short exchange, that communication? You don't actually hear, in terms of the questions, any response from the military helicopter, but it seems to be made aware of the civilian jet and asked to move. And there, as I say, the last words from the air traffic controller saying, "Did you see that?" and referring presumably to the mid-air collision that they were seeing there on their screens. Well, let's speak now to Graham Boud, an aviation journalist who joins us on the programme. And thank you so much, Graham, for being here with us. The obvious question, we heard it in the news conferences being asked again and again, how could something like this happen?
Well, Matthew, it is quite an extraordinary accident and a lot of questions to be answered, of course. There will be an NTSB inquiry, but I think what we can say now for sure is that this was a case of human error. The question is, who was at fault? There are three parties here. There's the crew of the jet aircraft, which was arriving at Washington from Wichita. There's the crew of the military helicopter, and there's air traffic control. I think it's very unlikely that the crew of the jet will turn out to be at fault. They were at a late stage of the approach. They had been cleared, certainly to approach the airport, if not to land, and they would have been concentrating on doing that. The last thing they would expect to see is another aircraft in their airspace. So I think probably the emphasis will be on what was the communication between air traffic control and the military helicopter. It has been reported that the air traffic controller said to the helicopter pilot, "Can you see that traffic on approach to Washington Airport?" The reply was positive, and he was then asked to pass behind it. Now, if that's the case, it's difficult to see what could possibly have happened, because we understand visibility was good. If the helicopter pilot could see the jet, how on earth did he fly into it?
Well, one of the working theories is that potentially, it is just a theory, but we've heard it from a number of experts, we could be talking about those on board the helicopter misidentifying, actually having visuals with the wrong passenger plane. That is a possibility, isn't it?
Yes, and I have a little bit of information about this, which I'd just like to explain. I think this could turn out to be a very important factor. The American Eagle jet that was approaching Washington was initially approaching on runway number 1. That's a north-south runway. There are 2 runways at this airport. However, at quite a late stage of the approach, air traffic control, and you can see this on radar recordings, apparently asked him to switch to another runway. The jet was only about 4 miles from the airport at that stage. He had to make a sidestep maneuver to move on to the approach to runway 33. Now, for the half hour or so before this accident, all the aircraft that were arriving at Reagan Airport had been arriving on runway number 1. So it may be that if the helicopter pilot was asked to look out for an aircraft on the approach, he might have been looking at the wrong approach. And the approach to number 1 runway was quite distant from where he was. He wasn't expecting to see an aircraft approaching runway 33, which was much closer to him.
And we know this airspace is incredibly busy, isn't it, over Washington? All of that will be poured over in terms of how civilian aircraft are controlled, how military aircraft are controlled, because this happens every day, but not this sort of disastrous outcome.
Yes, it is very busy airspace, probably some of the busiest in the United States, but that doesn't mean to say it's at all unsafe. There are very strict and rigid procedures about how this airspace is operated. It is controlled airspace, which means that all aircraft flying into it have to be in contact with air traffic control. And there are some very strict rules and procedures that have to be followed that are specifically designed to avoid such a thing from happening. So how it did happen is obviously extraordinary.
Graham, stay with us, because I was saying to our viewers and our audience, we are juggling 2 big stories today, so we will come back again to that. And I just want to show you the pictures from the White House, because we were anticipating that news conference from the Pentagon. That does seem now to have been parked, and we are expecting to hear from Donald Trump himself, and that is the White House press room. And we expect that in about 40 minutes' time. Again, that might be flexible in terms of timing. So we're keeping an eye on that live shot that's coming into us. We'll return as soon as we see the president. But we broke away from Graham because we are also monitoring events in the Middle East, the second part of the prisoner exchange and the hostages. We saw those releases a few hours ago. Let me show you the live pictures coming into us. We showed you the coaches and the buses that were arriving there to take the Palestinian prisoners, 110 or so. Those are the pictures coming into us. Nick Beake is our correspondent, watching all the events of earlier and this carrying out live. So Nick, just bring us right up to speed in terms of where we are with this process, the numbers about to be released and who they are.
Yeah, absolutely, Matthew. This is a process that's been delayed by a few hours because of what happened earlier in the day. And I'm just looking at the the footage that you are as well. Those coaches, some of them are International Red Cross coaches, at least two of them with their tinted windows. But it does seem that these Palestinian prisoners are being released. In terms of numbers, you ask about numbers, 110 today. And of course, this is calculated due to the number of hostages who were freed earlier from Gaza. The reason why, and we've been talking about this, why we've had this delay, is that the Israeli government were really angry about what they saw in Khan Yunis, so in the south of Gaza, earlier on, the chaotic scenes surrounding the release of two of the hostages, an 80-year-old man and a 29-year-old woman. Politicians here, including the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, saying completely unacceptable scenes, that gunmen were surrounding them, that there was chaos, there was no order, and so they said they were going to delay, as a consequence, the release of the Palestinian prisoners. It does seem that that is now happening now, and this is, for the moment, back on track.
Nick, tell me more about those people who are being released, because we are told they include women and children.
Yes, that's right. I mean, the breakdown I can give you today, this came from the authorities saying, well, it was the Hamas-run prisoners' media office. They said that 110 people today, 32 of whom had been sentenced to life, 48 were serving long sentences, 30 children on the list, the youngest said to be 15 years old. And of these, interestingly, 21 are due to be deported, so they won't be returning to homes in the West Bank or Gaza or elsewhere. They'll be leaving, going to places you'd imagine, including Egypt and Turkey. That was certainly the case in previous rounds of releases. So this is what's happening, and the nature of some of the offences people have committed. In some cases, it's the case that there's been no charge at all, but other very serious criminals, they've been responsible for the deaths of Israeli civilians. And so, by its nature, this sort of deal is controversial to some here in Israel. In Tel Aviv, you hear people saying that this is too high a price to pay, the sort of people who are being released today. Other people saying, well, this has to be done because it means that their loved ones are coming back. And of course, this is Hostages Square, where since October the 7th, people have kept this vigil going, saying that all of the hostages, some 250 taken on October the 7th, have to be released, and they won't stop until everyone is back. And today we've seen 8 more hostages released, including those 5 Thai citizens.
As you were talking, Nick, we were on our screen seeing pictures from Ramallah as well, because people waiting there for those buses and for those people to be released, the sort of family reunions that you were describing. Just take us through where we are on the timeline with this deal between Hamas and Israel, because this is the first phase. It's worth reminding people who are watching, this is the first phase, and we were told by day 16, and we're rapidly approaching that negotiators were supposed to start talking about the practicalities, the mechanics of how phase 2 would actually work. How close are we to actually starting that part of this?
Yes, we're just a few days away now. We're sort of 10 days into the ceasefire itself. As you say, this is an initial 6-week period over which time 33 hostages are to be released, at the same time as 1,900 Palestinian prisoners are released from Israeli jails. Now, as we've seen today, with this delay in the Palestinian prisoners being released, it's a fraught process. It's delicate. There are bumps along the way, to put it mildly, and any sort of spark can really potentially derail this process. A lot of people think that actually this might be the easiest part of it, because you've got this formula for how many hostages are released at the same time as Palestinian prisoners being released. If it's a civilian, if an Israeli civilian is released, that means 30 Palestinian prisoners are released. If it's an Israeli soldier, the number is 50. So there's this mathematical equation here. You've got the mediators all the time trying to ensure that this process goes as smoothly as possible. But absolutely, it's not the case that there is any sort of clear indication about what happens in the second and third phase. I mean, the big question is who runs Gaza? Who reconstructs it? You know, what are the essential, really fundamental questions that need to be answered? We heard Donald Trump at the weekend talking about it being a demolition site, saying that in terms of, you know, its future, he was saying it's over in terms of the amount of destruction there. And he was suggesting that neighboring countries should take in Palestinians so Palestinians could live in peace, as he put it. Now, that created a lot of anger. But in terms of what happens in these next phases, by no means clear. And again, today we've seen just how precarious this deal is. There's such a lack of trust between Hamas and Israel. And of course, that's, you know, more than understandable after the last 15 months.
Nick Peake, thanks very much. Well, we'll continue to monitor the scenes there. We'll be back to Ramallah in the next little while. We'll also be back to Washington to get the very latest. We are expecting to hear from Donald Trump in about 30 minutes' time from the White House. His first comments on camera after this collision between a passenger plane and a military helicopter. Those are the live pictures as that recovery operation continues in Washington.
Hello. Weak weather fronts are forecast to affect the UK over the coming days, so I think it's a perfect day to grab the sunshine whilst it's out. After a frosty start, most of us will have pretty clear skies through the rest of the day today with not a great amount of cloud around, so plenty of sunshine for us to look forward to through the rest of the afternoon with just bits and pieces of cloud running into northwestern areas. Quite breezy though for Orkney and Shetland. Could see a few splashes of rain working in here from a very weak weather front, but that really is the exception. Temperatures around 7 or 8 degrees quite widely today. Now, looking at the weather picture overnight tonight, we've got a weather front that's going to be pushing its way eastwards. As it does so, it's going to start to bump in to some colder air. Now, for most of the UK, we're looking at outbreaks of rain from this system. However, across some of the high ground, northern England and Scotland, above about 300 metres elevation, you might see it turn to snow for a time, perhaps an odd centimetre or two across some of the very highest areas, leaving a legacy of icy stretches into Friday. But for the vast majority, it's outbreaks of rain that we'll get from that system. The dregs of that will be clearing away from East Anglia and South East England Friday morning, taking the rain away with it. So a wet start to the day, but brightening up later on. Elsewhere, still probably a fair bit of cloud left over from that system, but I would still expect some bright or sunny spells. The best of these likely for Northern Ireland, Wales, western areas of England, western Scotland too. Now, the weekend sees further weak weather fronts move into this area of high pressure. So as they run into the UK, they just lose their strength, leaving just a strip of cloud and a bit of drizzle. So that's how we start the day on Saturday. A few patches of drizzle around, some mist and fog patches around coast and hills in the west. And as we go through the day, little overall change. There will be probably quite a lot of cloud around. Mild for Northern Ireland, but underneath that strip of cloud and drizzle, temperatures may well struggle for some. On into Sunday, we've still got cloud and drizzle across parts of Northern England, Wales and southwest England. Either side of that, though, there should be some bright or sunny spells coming through and temperatures around 6 to 9 degrees Celsius. So it's a relatively quiet weekend, and with high pressure often close to the UK into next week, often the weather is going to be dry and bright with some sunshine.